Hi everybody, welcome to the Eastside People Festival of Trusteeship. This session is Governance Hacks Easy Wins for your board. I'm Penny, I'm the Festival Director at Eastside People, and I'm just going to run through a bit of housekeeping before I pass over to Felicia, who's chairing the session. The session is being recorded, as you've seen. If you're a single session attendee, i.e. if you've booked this session separately, you'll get that tonight. If you're a weekly pass holder, you'll get all of the recordings at the end of the week so that we don't totally inundate your inbox. You've been muted automatically on arrival. Please stay muted to keep the sound nice and clear. If Felicia does come to you for a question and you want to speak to it, please note that you will therefore be on the recording. So if you don't want to be on the recording, don't unmute. Closed captions are available, so if you want the subtitles, you need to click CC or closed captions on your device. Please feel absolutely free to use the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Please introduce yourselves, ask questions, share reflections, ask questions of the panel, ask questions of each other, share resources. Festival chats are often really, really interesting and an excellent resource. Having said that, they can also sometimes get very, very busy. I don't know if anybody was on the 11 o'clock session this morning. It was very, very packed. So if you want to completely ignore the chat, please feel free. If Felicia is taking a question from the chat, she will read it out in full. And when you get the recording, you will also get the chat with the recording if you want to catch up afterwards. If you don't have a weekly pass, you can still purchase one. You can purchase one right up until the end of Friday. That gives you access to all 15 sessions this week and to all of their recordings. Just a note on Scotland and Northern Ireland, and indeed the rest of the world. Generally, we'll be focusing on England and Wales. So just a reminder that a lot of this will be standard. It will apply right across wherever you are geographically, but actually please do check local rules if you're not in England and Wales. A really massive thank you to the Institute of Leadership. It's thanks to their headline support that we can make the festival so accessible, and so many hundreds and hundreds of people have signed up. And thank you to this absolutely amazing range of lovely partners who have supported us in all sorts of ways. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pass over to Felicia, who's chairing the session.
Thanks so much, Penny. Huge thanks, obviously, to Penny for her amazing work on all of this. It's always a delight to be involved in the Festival Trusteeship. I'm so pleased that Eastside people are doing what they're doing and taking it forward. So I'm Felicia Willow. I specialise in supporting charities with governance, strategy, change and crisis directly through Willow Charity Consulting and by placing and supporting interim leaders through Interims for Impact. I'm going to be your chair for tonight. I'm joined by 4 governance experienced people to talk about governance hacks, so quick fixes and clever tweaks that can transform your board meetings. I often say that I divide my time between trying to advocate for change in our system and helping organizations navigate the realities of our sector. But the reality is there are lots of things you can do now, and I think sometimes we don't always acknowledge that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're thinking about practical ideas that can transform meetings and help your organization function more effectively. So we have a few questions we're going to go through with the panel. We have a couple of questions that have come through to us in advance. And obviously, as Penny said, if you'd like to ask questions, you can put them in the chat. I'm going to be trying to focus on both at the same time, but I will be keeping an eye on the chat as well. But we'll do those at the end, obviously, with the time we have left. So the first thing I'm going to ask is for our panel to introduce themselves. So we're going to do a quick whip around and a speedy intro. So I'm just going to look at where I'm sitting. So Janine, I'm going to start with you. Could you give her a quick intro, please?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Janine. Several different hats. I'm a small charity CEO. I'm a trustee of the Small International Development Trustees Network, my 3rd trusteeship. And I also am a governance consultant doing freelance projects with predominantly small charities.
Great, thanks. Steph, could I ask you to intro?
Hi, good evening. I'm Steph Harland. I've been a volunteer, a staff member, a trustee and a chair, and now I'm a consultant with the Bayes Centre for Charity Effectiveness.
Thank you. Emrys, could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm Emrys. I'm the chair of the global professional body, the Institute of Leadership. I've been on multiple charity boards over the years, some of the bigger ones and tiny ones with no staff or anything in there as well. So look forward to conversing more then.
Great, thanks. And last but not least, Sunit, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Sunit. I used to work in commercial law for 10 years and held 2 trustee roles during that time before being enticed over to the charity governance side of things, where I held senior leadership positions in LGBTQ+ charities. I'm a governance and membership manager, and I'm also a governance consultant at Eastside People.
Fantastic. Well, welcome everybody. It's a great panel. Looking forward to getting your views on the things that we're going to talk about. So one of the things, I think a lot of the time smaller charities can often feel like they can't do as much as bigger charities can. But one of the things I think is really exciting is what smaller charities can do around breaking free of some of those more corporate style board structures. So, board meetings have this kind of patriarchal corporate background that doesn't always seem to have much to do with a small charity setting. We've got the board table, archaic language, jargon, minutes and agendas and all these things that aren't actually natural to a lot of different people. But there's no law that says we have to do it this way. So what I'd love to hear from each of the panel members to start off with is what recommendations you have for doing meetings in a more dynamic, agile, charity kind of way. So I'm going to flip backwards from the way I've just been and start with Sunit. What are your ideas on this?
Thank you so much. So I've worked in a number of small charities, and I think focusing on kind of effectiveness and what those kind of meetings are there for is really, really important. And I've found some quick wins around, making a decisions as well as an action log, for example. So it really lets you hone in and look past the papers as to what you're actually deciding, and really helps you distill impact. The main thing I would say is make the process work for you. Consider the entirety of the board and what works for them, and evaluate your board meetings after the fact, because that can help you really create impact in what you're doing.
Great. Thanks. Emrys.
Yeah, so I mean, my day job is predominantly in the creative and digital industry, so I always sort of come with that hat slightly. And a couple of board meetings ago, I brought in a load of post-it notes and things as well to our board meeting to go, right, where are we at now? Getting everybody to note on that. I also do quite a bit of work bringing younger trustees onto boards. So actually, some of those sort of more engaging ways of actually physicalizing what board meetings might look like, being able to get up and move around the room, have different discussions, or build up flip chart papers, or creating drawings of what you want to see there, and sort of really trying to connect the strategy with the operation as well. And I think sometimes even that just helps people to actually have a more productive conversation. And as part of that, I think understanding the beneficiaries, being able to meet them and discuss with them outside of a board meeting, so that when you come to a board meeting, you can sort of embody their perspectives perhaps as well. And that actually just helps to liven things up a lot more, because you're not just talking to papers or policy, you're talking about how that will affect the people you are trying to benefit as a charity.
Is it interesting? You get out the post-it notes and the flip charts and the moving around every time you do a strategy away day. It's the first thing we do, right? We kind of go, right, we're going to move around. We're going to think about energy. We're going to do all these things. We don't do it for board meetings very often. I think that's such a great point, that you can use all of those tools that are out there in such a constructive way. I don't know if everyone's come across liberating structures. I use loads of them in my facilitation, and it's some of the cheapest training you can get as well. So it's accessible to most charities, but they show some really good ways of using some of those activities. So yeah, great ideas, Emrys. Steph.
Just building on something that Sunit just said, I find it's really useful at the beginning of the meeting if we just take a moment to say, what do we really want to get out of this meeting today? Often people will have received a pile of paper, and it's just really good to hear from all of the participants in the meeting, what caught your attention? What do you really want us to have done in this meeting today? And then I think, Sunit, you said this too, to take that time at the end of the meeting, 5-10 meetings, just say 5-10 minutes, just to say at the end of the meeting, what do we feel about the meeting we've had today? What went well? Did we get out of this meeting what we intended to get? I think just doing that at the beginning and end of meetings creates a really productive conversation, and it's a great habit to get into. Doesn't take a lot of time to plan, and you'll find you can execute it really well. I think the other thing that other people have said that's really important is don't ever be afraid to mix it up. You can have different kinds of items, different kinds of discussions, whether you're walking around with the post-its or for different things. You don't have to treat every item the same. It doesn't have to have the same information behind it or the same kind of discussion about it. So don't be afraid to mix it up.
Great. Thanks. I think that's such a good point as well. I think sometimes we go through meetings as a bit of a tick box approach, don't we? And I mean, I do some observations, and I've seen people like drone through these reports, and I'm like, but these were shared in advance. Why are we spending all this time when we could be doing something interactive? Janine.
Lots of good stuff mentioned already, so I'll just add a couple more to the mix. Don't be afraid to add in board additional meetings. So what I found, in addition to our sort of structured quarterly ones, sometimes there's quite a meaty issue, or the board really want a deep dive on a particular aspect of our work. So we kind of create that time separately outside of the board meetings, which I think really helps. And I think also just thinking about how we hear different voices, and much like you reflected on, when we're in a strategy day, we use different ways of having the conversation, breakout groups and smaller group discussions. We can bring the same into our board conversations as well.
Absolutely. I remember I worked with a hospice once, and they did that. They called it Power of the Hour. And they just would have these, when they had tricky things that came up that you couldn't really get into in a board meeting, they would schedule an hour to do a deep dive. I've recommended that to so many organizations since I met them. Obviously, if anyone, when you're listening to any of these questions, if you're sitting there thinking, we've got a really good thing that we do feel free to share that in the chat as well. Don't feel that you're only here to receive ideas. We'd love to hear from what everyone's doing. Because I think this is the thing, we do have a bit more freedom than we think we do in doing the meetings the way that works. I think also Emrys was talking about working in creative industries. I remember working with a really small dynamic arts charity, and they were like, they were finding the meetings really discouraging, and being able to say, actually, we can do things creatively. It's like, yes, you're really creative people. Use that. Think about how you can do it. I think it's really exciting. Online meetings. We are having a fully online meeting right now. It's great. We haven't had to travel to be together, which is nice. Obviously, we lose the kind of sitting around the tea table type of thing. They enabled us to get going through COVID, and my goodness, what an incredible time that was for the charity sector. I'm so proud of what we all achieved at that time. But have they had their time? And is hybrid the worst of all worlds? I personally hate hybrid. I won't do it now, but I know a lot of other people still have to. So how can small charities balance the benefits and disadvantages of video and hybrid kind of meetings? To start off with this, I'm going to throw to Emrys for his thoughts on this question.
Absolutely. I'm just going to lean in slightly and talk a bit louder. Hopefully you can hear me a bit better this time as well. So, digital meetings and hybrid meetings, two different things. They do keep getting thrown together a bit sometimes in terms of discussion, and they both have their sort of pros and cons, I reckon. So in terms of for digital meetings only, I think there is very much a place for them, especially for small charities. I work with one particular small national charity, and all of their meetings really are online. One of the big benefits is that you can have slightly shorter but more frequent meetings. So gone are the days of having to get together every quarter and just leaving everything till then. Actually meeting once a month for an hour or so might be more agile, might help you to cover more things and to keep charity progressing a bit more. I find that does actually work really well. And then in terms of hybrid, I think hybrid sessions can also be valuable in terms of access and inclusion for people who might not be local to a particular area, or for childcare or other reasons they can't actually make a meeting, whether it's last minute or not. Although I am a fan of either go digital or go in person where you can, especially if you are a quarterly board meeting type charity, and having that personal connection is brilliant. However, where it is useful in terms of access, then being able to have hybrid is great, but you do have to, one, have the right sort of tech, whether that is cameras, audio, all of that to be, so everyone can participate fully. And secondly, it is more of a job for the chair. You need to be a skilled facilitator to really see what's going on online as well as what's on in front of you in the room. One of the top tips really for that for me is actually having somebody who is online as a support or assistant type person, whether that is actually your meeting minute taker maybe, or whoever it is, just so they can keep an eye and then actually interrupt you more specifically. This trustee is trying to get hold of something, or something's come up in the chat, or whatever it might be. But however skilled you are, having another pair of eyes in there can be great. Or it's just the understanding of the trustees as to how they can get their voice in there. But it's trying not to forget, there's 3 people on there, and if you're doing a bit of a loop around the room or something. So that's my key thing really about that one. But a mixture of them is brilliant. If you have your quarterly big board meeting in person, and then like we do at the Institute of Leadership, most of our additional meetings or committee meetings are online, and they're normally shorter and such. So it's a good sort of mixture of the two where possible, I think.
Absolutely. Do you all remember that time during COVID, like 2021, kind of around that time, when people would get pinged And you just, every meeting you went to, if it was in person, it was hybrid, and that kind of idea of having the people, your head in two different places, I think that was the bit that really put me off it. I'm just going to quickly read through some of the comments because there's some interesting comments on this before I flip to another panel member. So Sharon has written, hybrid meetings have been great for us to enable us to recruit a new TS trustee who's often abroad and benefit from her skills. That's a really good point. Doric has said, in my experience, trustees who join a hybrid meeting online are significantly less engaged than people in the room. I think that's so true. And it's hard to engage them as well because you can't always hear what they're saying, especially if someone's, I've had the thing where someone's like, I'll hold the laptop, and they go around with this person on a laptop all day, and you think this is not a good experience for either side. And Neil has said, oh, I'm sorry, no, that's not Neil's one. There was a small, hang on, where we go. Small suggestion for hybrid meetings. This is Julian, sorry. Everyone in the room has a laptop with their own camera on, which levels everyone. That's kind of turning it more into a completely online meeting, isn't it? And also James has noted that the CC issued new guidance this year on digital decisions, and it is really important making sure that you have the ability to meet. Of course, over the COVID, they allowed people to meet, even if it wasn't in their constitution. But it is definitely something to look for. It's getting less common, I think, to find those constitutions that don't have it, but there are still ones out there, and people have made the assumption that they can. So yeah, always worth checking your governing document to make sure you're allowed to meet electronically. And there's some links that have been provided in there if anyone's particularly interested in this. Great, I think. So there's a lot of things there. I'm now going to pass to Janine for some more comments on this question. So online, hybrid, pros and cons.
Well, I'm with you on hybrid perhaps being the worst of all worlds. So, and for the reasons that Emrys talked about, I think you need to have the right tech in place, which often in small organizations we don't. We're very lucky at PFP, the charity I'm a CEO for, that we have a fantastic corporate partner who lets us use their very swish meeting spaces that are set up for hybrid conferencing. So people are they can see the whole room and they're participating in the discussion, but that's the exception, I think, rather than the rule, particularly for smaller organizations. But online, from my perspective, we simply couldn't function as a board without online meetings. I've got trustees in France and Kenya, all across the UK, and we just couldn't get together. We do get together in person once a year, and it's planned very carefully around people's travel schedules so that they will be in the UK anyway. But it does, digital is really, really important to us.
Right. And I think on that accessibility issue as well, you're talking about reaching people in other countries. Lisa has made a comment that she's housebound and unable to join in-person meetings. So it's not a choice for some of us. And I think that's a really important one. And I guess that's where the question around hybrid versus, if you've got an online meeting, I think everyone's saying that is a real value to that. Hybrid, I mean, one of the things I do when I run away days is if someone last minute can't come, I then meet with them the next day for an hour or two to go through what happened and get their input. And I think sometimes that can be a better approach than having them be present in this awkward way where they're not really involved in the way they need to be. But if there are a number of people, as Emrys was saying, I like the idea of having someone kind of on the team who's basically doing a bit of online facilitation at the same time. I think that's a really good idea for managing that kind of situation. Oh, someone said, does the panel have a view on digital minute takers? It's going to kind of lead quite nicely into the next bit where we're going to be talking about digital tools. But let's start with that question. Anyone got a strong opinion on digital minute takers? Steph.
I'll have a go at that. So I think many of you will have had the same experience, which is that these minute takers turn up these days in force and knock at the door and ask to be admitted. So the first thing I'm going to say is that we discovered together in the Board of Trustees that I chair that we could say no. And so the first thing to say to them, you can just say no, you're not going to let them in. I think if you do let them in, what you get these days is you get an amazing transcript of everything that's been said with all the ers and ums. There is no doubt this is the way that things will move. We will learn how to use these tools. I'm sure of it. Right now, I think we don't quite yet see how to. So again, traditionally, whether that's a good or a bad thing, minutes are more of a kind of not a verbatim transcript of every single word that everyone said. They're hopefully something that gives us a much more of a guide to what went on in the meeting and is kind of well summarized. So I think we'll have to come to grips with these tools, and we will get to the next question. At the moment, my view is no, thank you.
Anyone else have a view on this, the digital minute takers?
Despite being a digital native and very much in that sort of realm, actually, I still think that capturing the nuances and sort of sentiment of the conversations is really a real person job as well. I think as a support tool, essentially, you know, good old days of putting your tape recorder in the middle or whatever to listen back to for accuracy. Actually, that's really handy. And as Steph already mentioned, the sort of summaries that it can produce is there, but I don't think they're a replacement for sort of proper minute taking and capturing actions correctly, because you know I use them all the time or see them, but there's always some things that are just a bit wrong. And when it comes to governance, you've got to be accurate and know that this is a reflection on what was agreed, I think.
Great.
From my perspective, and I think I just saw a comment flash up, but our minutes get turned around a lot quicker by just turning on the AI summary within Zoom, because I forward that onto our company secretary with the recording. And it's just, rather than starting with her handwritten notes, it's much easier and things get picked up that would otherwise have been missed. So I agree with you, Emrys, they're part of it, but they're not all of it. But I have heard about a charity that has actually trained AI to produce minutes in its format. So I'm curious to know more about that.
It's funny, when I interview associates, I actually found that I get the transcript from Zoom, and then I use ChatGPT to get what I need. And again, it's been taking a lot of training to get what I need out of it, and I still have to review it and make sure the key things aren't missing. But it's I wouldn't do it for a governance project or something like that, where I need to take the notes and I need it to be exactly how I need it. But yeah, so the next question is digital tools. They can be really expensive, so they can be out of the reach of most small charities. But there are a lot of tools that are worth their weight in gold and are just what charities need. So what is your go-to? So Steph, what's your go-to with digital tools?
Oh, having just exposed myself as a Luddite, I think my experience with lots of charities is that we sometimes get preoccupied with the idea that there's a wonderful new thing that we haven't got already that will solve all of our problems. And in fact, all of you talking about how you're already using the stuff that's available with Zoom and ChatGPT and so on, just showing very often the question is, can we use the tools we've got really well? So I know people who can use Excel so well, for example, that they can make beautiful pictures. It'll even come around to your house and buy your Christmas presents and wrap them up and put them under the tree. So, and I've done a lot of work in big networks where you see that some organizations have got someone in them who really knows how to use the tools and to forge ahead and can make them do all sorts of tricks, whereas other people are still kind of really sort of bashing their heads against the wall. And I think what we need as a sector is much more support to use the tools often that we've already got, and to really make sure that we can get absolutely everything out of them. And Excel for me is a good example of that.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And that can be, the trust of training can be just out of reach. I always think there's sometimes in Teams, and you look at all of the apps that are in Teams and all these things, and I'm like, I have no idea how to use 90% of those, because you don't get access to the training. It's really yeah, it's really difficult, I think, sometimes. Sunit, what's your view on digital tools?
I see some comments in the chat that I just want to quickly riff off. So you do have to be careful with AI from a data protection and confidentiality standpoint, especially if it is trained using your data. So I just wanted to round that point off. I also think that's relevant to this question. From working in a small kind of resource-strapped organization, we use Monday.com for project management. And it also has utility in Google Forms. It's very low cost. It's accessible. You can download templates from it as well. So Monday.com was really useful. If you want a free alternative, Trello is also really, really great as a substitute. I know there is an end-to-end solution called On Board that is very highly lauded, but that is quite expensive.
I think I've used that one before with a bigger organization. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hannah has just shared an organization. This organization is amazing, helps charities and social enterprises learn how to use digital tools for good. So there's a link in the chat if anyone just missed it, because I think that sounds really, really useful. Emrys, digital tools.
Yeah, the one I was going to throw in should acknowledge that we're Google partners, but actually Google Workspace for nonprofits is pretty handy with a whole range of tools, and completely free for charities once you get through the slightly arduous approval process. But if you get through that, it opens up a world of tools to you. And Gemini, for example, their AI version, people have been talking about ChatGPT, etc. But it's fairly good, and it isn't then used to train the models because it's sort of kept within essentially sort of sandbox. But yeah, so Google Workspace for nonprofits, I think, is the go-to tool for so many things, especially with sharing minutes and documents and that sort of thing. Sometimes that can be a challenge. Some people like to have charity emails. Some people really don't like to have charity emails. I find a real mixture there. So even if it is just, okay, here's a Google Drive with all of our files in there, especially if you can't afford other tools like Boardable or other sort of more commercially available tools as well. So yeah, I'd go there. I would also say, just linking back to the hybrid sessions and stuff, that actually you can do those things relatively low cost with an iPad on a stand. In fact, I've got one next to me here, and a good sort of multi-mic speaker that you can put in the middle of the table that doesn't have to cost the earth. So that's the other thing with digital tools is invest in the right ones. I think it's worth spending a little bit sometimes on them, but really 99% of the time you do not need to be spending hundreds or lots and lots of money, you know, on things that might be really powerful and wow. As well, look for the free versions for charities, or for something that's maybe not the cheapest but definitely not going to cost the earth for the charity.
Yeah, it does seem that investing in these kind of tools is something that a lot of charities really struggle with. It's hard to get funding for it. And then I think sometimes it feels hard to justify it internally. But I've worked with so many organizations where the CRM in particular has been a real problem and a real drain on people resources. And you come in and you kind of try to point out that actually you've got 2 people working in this job, and that's costing you a salary every year. But if you actually had a functional CRM, you'd only need to pay for 1 person. So I think sometimes thinking about the costs of these things in terms of the people time is really important, and not, you know, and I realize I'm talking about organizations with paid staff here. But, you know, even when you have a tiny charity, if you start having any kind of paid staff, you can sometimes be saving a huge amount of money on staff costs with good digital. So it is that balance. I think, Emrys, I think you're absolutely right, that balancing between investment and not necessarily everything bells and whistles, but functional for CRM in particular is so important. Teresa's recommended using Firefly's meeting note taker and Ossa. I've used Ossa a couple of times myself. It's, yeah, and the human intervention, as she notes, is really important. So, and then somebody, I think Canva's been mentioned a couple of times as well. I'm not a particularly good person when it comes to visual design, and I've loved Canva and what it can do. One of the drums I love to bang, and I know Penny's been writing something on this topic recently, is about how rigid politeness norms can inhibit good debate and decision making. And so I'm going to ask the panel, you know, what tips they have around getting around some of these resistance we have towards disagreeing with each other. And I'm going to throw to my fellow Antipodean, because I think we have less discomfort with disagreement. So Janine, what's your thoughts on this question?
Thanks so much. Yeah, I agree with you. I think we really need to get past it. And the phrase that comes to mind for me is from The Rest is Politics, and Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart talk about disagreeing agreeably.
Agreeably, yeah.
Get that the right way round.
Agreeing disagreeably is not what they're trying to do.
And I'm very lucky, I suppose, with my CEO hat on and with my current board that I'm on, I'm very lucky that we have the ability to do that. And I think that's because we've got the right trust in place, which is absolutely essential. But I have come across and seen boards where that has an impact. I mean, I've seen charities close because boards failed to challenge each other and to hold, you know, in the case where they were employing a chief exec, holding the staff to account, and you know, what looks like harmony actually is quite dysfunctional under the surface. So some things that help, I think, some really simple language flips. And don't tell my husband, but I learned this from him. He does a lot of training and facilitation in his day job, and just simply changing the question from who has questions to what questions have you got starts from an assumption that we all have questions. So really modeling that and making challenge part of the culture. And I think that's an onus on all of us as trustees that sit on boards, and all of us and particularly chairs of boards as well who are on this call to do that. So modeling it. Again, I think about another example of with my CEO hat on, but you know, where the board we were coming up to quite a meaty strategic decision that had a number of risks, both financial and non-financial. And it was clear, I think, that the trustees perhaps were engaging in a bit of groupthink, and everyone was very positive about it, but no one was looking. So my chair very dynamically in that scenario played the devil's advocate. And it took me a little bit by surprise. I mean, we debriefed afterwards, but it took me by surprise in the meeting itself. But I very much understood why that had happened. And I think that's really important. So those kind of things, taking the devil's advocate approach, actually naming it, building it into the structure and say, right, I want you to adopt different positions on this, or let's look at it from different lenses, from the point of view of our partners, our funders, our client group, for example. And then I think the sort of debriefing afterwards, and particularly where discussions have been quite heated or there has been some disagreement, checking in afterwards, helping people to recognize that that's not an unhealthy thing. It's actually the sign of a healthy board, I think are all important. So those are just a few ideas I had.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do a lot of governance reviews, and one of the questions I always ask is what happens when trustees have a different viewpoint. And of course, what I'm hoping to hear is that there's a really good, robust debate. And I'd say 99% of the time I get, oh, we don't have conflict. We don't disagree. We almost always have consensus. And I'm like, that's actually not good. That's not a good answer. And I think they're trying to reassure me that there's not a really conflict-ridden board. And actually, I didn't ask that. I asked about what happens when people have a different viewpoint. So I think it can sometimes be quite tricky to get people to realize that and separate the idea from the person. I remember one organization I worked with who said, I don't want to agree when someone has a different view from me because they might be insulted. And I don't think these people would have been insulted, but they had that kind of impression. So it's really tricky. Steph, I know you've got a different take on that, so I'm going to flip to you here.
Oh, I don't know. So Saneet told us that they're up at the beginning of the meeting that he'd been looking at the new charity governance code. And the only thing that I've gleaned about it is that there is a new provision about courtesy and respect when disagreeing. And that's one of the new elements of the new code that I think is pretty much out today. I think, as Janine says, one of the things about disagreement is it's so personal. It's all to do with, our own personal experience, our culture, our background, our experiences in education, our work experience. It's really difficult, isn't it? But I love what you just said, Felicia, which is that when we see a board where everybody says they never disagree, that is a real sign of trouble. And I think the best we can do with it is, first of all, to talk about it. I think the other thing that we can do in the way that we structure and organize ourselves when we're talking about is when we've got to a point where there might be difficulty, is to really just slow things down a bit and what I sometimes like to do is give every single person the chance to speak and just say, this is a really difficult issue for us. I'd like to hear from everybody, and don't feel the need to answer back what other people have said. Just say where you're at on this. And sometimes if you do that and you keep things really calm, it just gives people permission to all say where they are, to show that it's okay for us to be in different places, because it absolutely is. And then sometimes the answers seem to present themselves. But it is a really tricky issue. And I'm not surprised in a way that the new Charity Governance Code has picked up on it.
So, of course, when things do go horribly wrong, then it's really horrible as well, isn't it? So I think that's a really interesting point there, Steph, the idea of people saying their views. I think one of the things in that context that can be really useful is to not try to make the decision straight away. Sometimes when you have a big decision, everybody's really keen to be like, I think we should do this. And actually it's like, let's not say what we think we should do. Let's just talk about what we're thinking about, what our ideas are. And actually I find that people will often change their mind and come to a better answer if they haven't thrown the gauntlet down or said, this is where my line is or something. It's like, actually keep that open for a bit. So I think Neil's made a comment on the chat, which I think is really interesting, is the worst argument one has is within the family who love you. So don't worry about disagreements. The more comfortable you are with each other, the more challenge there will be. I think that's a really great point. And I think Janine, you mentioned about trust being built. And that's one thing I think, going back to the hybrid online thing, is it is harder to build that trust when you're online. You can't have those little side conversations. You can't build one-to-one relationships when you're on this kind of a screen. And so that kind of ability to have that one-to-one one-to-one time, even if it's one-to-one online, but not as a group, to build that trust, to build that comfort, I think is so important. So yeah, great point on that. One of the challenges of running particularly small charities, especially those who don't have staff, but it happens with organizations with staff as well, is balancing that time between strategy and operations. And also, I think for those with staff, recognizing where that line is. So what tricks and tips do you have for ensuring the boards don't get caught up in the day-to-day too much? I'm going to start with Suneet, because we haven't heard from you for a while, Suneet, so I'm going to go down to you.
Thank you so much. So my brother's an auditor, so I got this idea from him, and he talks about it a lot when it comes to decision making and balancing strategy with operations. And obviously, this will depend on the context of your charity and the degree of which the trustees are hands-on or not. But it's the RACI model, so you can basically put in your scheme of delegation, for example, a table that says who's responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's informed for each matter. And that makes it really, really clear where each individual stands. And I think it provides a really helpful framework that you can just kind of use to determine, to what degree an individual should be involved and to prevent over-involvement.
Sorry, just got a tickly throat then. Yeah, great answer. I mean, delegations of authority are so important. If you've got anyone who, is doing anything for your organization, a delegation of authority is such an important instrument to have. But yeah, Reiki model's awesome. Steph, I think you had something to comment on this one as well.
I think this is in the spirit of other things we've said. I think sometimes people are a bit polite about discussing this particular issue, particularly in smaller charities where some trustees may be quite involved in actually doing the day-to-day work. I think that it's really important that when we plan meetings and we decide what's going to be on the agenda, that we distinguish between discussing if we do need, as the trustees, this is for very small charities, if we do need to talk about practical matters like, I don't know, a rota for the coming month or something like that, it may be important and not practical to say we're not going to discuss that at the trustees meeting. But you can divide up the agenda in a really clear way. And you can also make sure that you're not too polite about saying to trustees who are tipping over that line that's sometimes very hard to find between strategic and operational. I think we're getting off track here. I think we're getting into the wrong place. I think it's important to use language which isn't too derogatory. Sometimes I've done reviews of charities where trustees felt very put down by some of what had been said to them when they were crossing that line. So, for example, I remember a trustee saying to me that they'd been told that they got into the weeds. And they were quite upset by that. That was a way of sort of they felt sort of put back in their box. So it does need handling. It needs careful planning. It needs repetition, and it needs to be depersonalized, I think, is what I would say.
Right. We talk a lot about diversity on boards. It's a big topic, the importance of getting different people in the room, not just in terms of protected characteristics, but different personality types, socioeconomic backgrounds, lived and work experience, skill sets, all of those kind of things. But of course, the more diverse your board becomes, the harder it can be to agree, because actually people of the same background, the same mindset, the same experiences are more likely to have exactly the same opinions, which is why the decisions are probably not so good as when we get a diverse group. One of my favorite books, which is Rebel Ideas by Matthew Side. If you haven't read it, you absolutely should read it. It's such a great book. It talks about how the best decisions are often those that are hardest to reach, and often the ones that you feel more uncertain about. So the more confident you feel with your decision and the easier it was to reach, actually the less likely it's the best decision, which I think is really such a challenge to how we all probably assume decision making is. So really get your hands on that book. And I don't get a cutback of his sales, by the way. I just really like it. So how do boards manage this challenge? Where good decisions are hard and bad decisions might be easy. Suneet, I think you had some thoughts on this one.
Thank you, Felicia. So I think really the framing for this for me is about psychological safety and building psychological safety, which enables constructive challenge on your board. So it's about allowing proactive listening and challenge and engagement from all the trustees across the table. And you have to become kind of comfortable with a degree of uncertainty, a degree of challenge, and even a degree of conflict in doing that and interrogating these decisions. And that's not easy. So, you know, those away days, that in-person time is really, really important to really hashing out your board culture to enable this. And I think also it's really important to understand that you're collectively responsible after the decision, even if you disagree with it, and that you have collective resilience as a board. So you really need to work together and support each other, whether that's check-ins after the fact or kind of sense checking with the chair about what the tone has been like in a meeting after the fact is really, really helpful. And that, I think, enables the resilience of the board to move forwards.
Fantastic. Emrys, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand where everybody is coming from, and that's sort of links to actually getting to know your sort of fellow trustees and developing that sense of, okay, you've got that experience, and you know, as was mentioned going back earlier, in a way, you know, you can disagree with something, but as Sunit has just said as well, once a decision is made, you still have that collective responsibility going forward. So if you disagree with something, I think it's absolutely fine to, you know, bring your perspective and experience and go, here's my challenge, here's my question. Let's just, you know, just to make sure that actually everything is factored in there, I think. So, but nonetheless, just because you might have slightly longer debates or discussions, that on the most part, that should be very healthy and is, you know, actually having a diversified board is hugely beneficial as well. I mentioned earlier, I do a lot about getting young people onto boards. I'll share a link actually for the Association of Chairs I reflected on quite recently on that particular topic. So I've just seen the note say you can't hear me very well. I'm sorry about that. I'm not quite sure.
Sorry, I could hear you.
Why. But yeah, I think it's great to have those voices and just to get to know where people are coming from so that you can challenge the ideas and come to some sort of consensus or at least majority vote and be happy that you have at least given the challenge and had the questions answered that you might have had, even if you're not in there. But respecting everybody's viewpoints in a room and getting to know why they might have that viewpoint is important for effective meeting, I think.
I think it's interesting. This kind of comes back a bit to what we were talking earlier about rigid politeness norms. Sometimes I see these norms that are quite group specific, you know, specific to people who are used to working in these kind of environments, perhaps don't have the lived experience. And when you bring, say, lived experience into the board or someone with a different culture into the board, there's these rules about these shared mental maps around how you behave and how you kind of communicate with each other. And I think that's where I sometimes see, you know, someone joins the board who's going to be a real asset because they will bring a different viewpoint, but they don't stay because actually they weren't enabled to participate in a way that was comfortable for them because of these kind of quite rigid views around how you're supposed to behave in a boardroom. And I think that's, you know, kind of building on what you were saying, Emrys, I think that's, you know, so important to have that recognition that maybe diversifying means things aren't going to work exactly as they did before, and that's okay. And appreciating, you know, I always think, especially with lived experience, people are going to be more passionate if it's something that affects them directly, and we should be comfortable with passion, you know, in that kind of situation. But we're not always, you know. Anyone else want to chime in on that question before I move to the next one? No, are we good? Okay, this is one for everybody. And then, so I'm going to encourage people, if by the way, if I've missed any key question that people wanted to ask as we go through, I'm sorry, and I'm going to be coming to questions in just a moment. So if you've got questions you want to ask the board, the panel, while we're going around on this last question, feel free to put it in. And I apologize if I've missed it. There's been a lot, so I've been scrolling through and listening at the same time. So the final question I've got from our initial set, you're suddenly in charge of the Charity Commission. What's the first thing you change to make boards more impactful? Janine, I'm going to start with you.
I remembered to take myself off mute. I think the biggest shift I would like to see at the moment, it feels to me like the Charity Commission is seen as a regulator of bad governance when we get things wrong. And I'd like to see them shifting into more of a mindset of champions of good governance. And I think I've seen some positive signs. So I was on a working group with Penny recently that the Charity Commission convened about board behaviours and dynamics and looking at what practical tools there could be for the sector. I think we've seen some of those things come out, like their 5-minute trustee videos where they converted that very lengthy, you know, 78-page guidance document on the essential trustee into some short, sharp 5-minute videos. But I think there's a lot more that they could do on that part. I don't know, maybe it's not the role of the regulator, but if I was in charge, I would be advocating for more resources going into good low cost or free governance support for the sector. I think it's a travesty that we don't have Getting On Board anymore, that the two organisations that were specifically set up to champion small charities and strengthen governance, FSI and Small Charities Coalition, don't exist. And if the regulator wants a well-skilled, well-governed sector, it needs to put some investment into building the capacity of that sector and giving trustees support.
Well, excellent answer, Janine. I completely agree with you. So, Steph, what's your thought on this one?
Wow, I guess I'm just thinking about what you just said, Janine. My thought about this question was, I completely agree with all of the things that it would be great to see the Commission doing. I guess my thought is they're not going to. And what I would like them to be much clearer about, so this is a less ambitious answer, is I'd like them to be really clear with people about what they are, what they do, and what they don't do. Because I find in my work with different charities that people have all sorts of expectations and they have all sorts of ideas in their head, which they're perfectly justified in having about what the Commission might do or might not do. And I think it's really unclear to people what it's there for and what it's going to do. And I think they could, I like their 5-minute guide. I think they could do a much better job of telling people what they are there for and what they can help with, what they're not going to do, which we needn't worry about, because sometimes people have the impression that they might make a dawn raid just on spec, for example, and they're not just going to turn up on spec to see if you're doing the wrong thing. That would be quite good. I think people find it quite reassuring if they were clearer about that. And I think it's a bit ambiguous for people and they'd like to know. So ideally, I'd like them to do everything you said, Janine, but if they're not, I'd just like them to be really clear with people what they are and aren't going to do.
Great. Emrys, what are you going to do? First thing you're going to change to make boards more impactful?
I think probably everything these guys have just said.
Oh no, we've got groupthink. Ah.
Oh, well, it's a good point. At least my notes then lead me to something else, which is actually for the Charity Commission to particularly encourage or even mandate as part of CC3 or whatever it might be, that board diversity and inclusion sort of principle, particularly with lived experience and understanding that people, particularly of different ages, perhaps will bring those different experiences as well. Sometimes people will think decades of experience equals they must know, the best there, but actually sometimes fresh think, new ideas, new approaches can also be valuable. I personally believe both are valuable in a good debate and conversation, so I think a board should have both. I'm not advocating for one or the other, it is about both. But I think that's something from a Charity Commission perspective, if there's any way I could sort of mandate accessible onboarding, inclusive meetings, the idea that actually, charities do need to be made up of different people for the benefit of those that they're there to serve, I think would be useful.
Great. Suneet.
I think that there is an awful lot of base level guidance coming out of the Commission, and it makes translating governance through to strategic impact really difficult. So what I would do is I would implement an audit tool that similar, for example, but a bit more advanced to the financial kind of tool they already have, that provides a directive questionnaire to trustees where they can really get that actionable guidance.
Fabulous. So we had a couple of questions come in advance of the session, so I'm going to quickly run through those before I get to the ones in the chat, which I think are building. Suneet, I'm going to stay with you. So this was, what does best practice governance look like? Good governance look like for a relatively early stage non-profit startup?
Thank you. So when I was at Proud Changemakers, I was Deputy CEO of Governance, really helping them start out in their governance journey. And to do that, I really had to align with the strategic enablers and the cultural enablers of what they wanted their governance to look like. So it's really important to be clear on those drivers and then make sure that you kind of implement everything strategically from there. So get really clear about what you need, how you're going to implement it, and what your capacity is, because, we were very, very time poor and there wasn't, being frank, the ability to turn our hand to everything that we may have liked to. So, for example, we looked for positive board behaviours when we recruited our trustees against the Charity Governance Code and framed our questions that way, kind of a two birds with one stone approach. So there are ways you can approach that and kind of set the baseline for building upon good governance to reach best practice.
Great, thanks. Another of the questions we got, which I'm just going to throw open to see who on the panel would like to answer it, is if I no longer want to be a trustee, how do I leave? Anyone like to take that one? Emrys?
I've just done this, and it's not that I didn't want to continue to be a trustee. I would have loved to, but life is changing, and I needed that bit more time for other things, unfortunately. And I've been a trustee for 5.5 years of another charity. And the key thing I think was letting the chair and CEO know, so a good year or so ago, I'd flagged they were undergoing sort of more recruitment to the trustee board as well. And actually, because I'd been on the board so many years, I sort of had, I think, like 4 different hats, so to speak, sort of things that I was looking after as a trustee. So I was able to start handing that on to other trustees. So which we call it an orderly exit. And I still have passion for that charity, still engaged, still doing things with them where I can as well. Literally only left it weeks ago. But yeah, so I think you can love a charity, love what they're doing and the impact they're having. But you have to sometimes, go, okay, something has changed. We need to make that. So I think where you can plan ahead, where you can go, look, I love what you're doing. Let's try and make this easy. Let's hand over. Let's stay on until you've recruited some relevant other folks. I think that's, the nicest possible way. Of course, sometimes it might have to happen a bit quicker, but, if you can sort of forethink, is that the way to put it? Then that's definitely useful. And just sort of plan, and people will understand, I really didn't want to have that conversation, but, it had to happen. So, people will support you, I think.
Fabulous. So I'm going to ask this first question from Penny, which some of you may know Penny Wilson, who's put this question in the chat. Is there anything like any such thing as a quick hack, or do we need to accept that good governance takes time and effort? I think that's such a brilliant question, because are these hacks alone going to get you to good governance? Probably not. What do people think about that question? Steph?
I think, and I'm sure Felicia and Sunit, you see this in your work, I think there's a lot of boom and bust in governance improvement. I think we often let it go for a long time, and then we engage in some great big review or some big kind of, how are we doing? I think little and often is the way to improve your governance. I think thinking about it, asking each other questions, reading things as they come out, not trying to digest the entire all of the commission's guidance and everything else in the world all in one go. So I really do think you can do a lot of small things, one at a time, and it's really a good idea to make sure that you systematically or regularly talk about governance and reflect on it, not just save it all up until either things have got really out of hand, or you just let it go and then you invite somebody to come in and have a look at it, and there's just so many different things that you've kind of allowed to kind of get out of hand. So, and the other thing I would say, and Sunit, you just talked about the role you had in your startup, is try and get someone to take care of it and look after it. So if that's not a staff member, you haven't got a staff member, try and have a trustee who isn't the chair, preferably, who can just look after governance and kind of bring thoughts and ideas to everybody else about how we can do this as easily, effectively, painlessly, and as well as possible.
Great. So I've had a question from Lorraine. How do you make terms of reference accessible for all on a board and potential new trustees? And I guess, I kind of think almost not just terms of reference, but everything that you have to deal with, papers and, even the language we use, the jargon. I feel like all of this stuff comes down to the accessibility. So I'm going to build a little bit on her question. How do we do that in a way that obviously still meets the governance requirements? Who would like to take that one on? Janine?
I'll jump in with with one example. I was with a brilliant charity on Friday, facilitating a governance day with their new trustees and introducing them to the role. In their board welcome pack, they have a 2-page summary, bullet pointed, of their constitution and key things like what is a quorum, how often do meetings happen, how do we take decisions. So no one is, yes, everyone's furnished with a copy of the 20-page model CIO governing document from the Charity Commission, but at a glance, they've got the quick kind of functions of the organisation in front of them. And I thought that was really clever.
Great. Sharon's asked, does anyone have any practical tips to encourage input/questions/contributions from every board member during a meeting if or when there are loud voices on the board who may monopolize discussions? Major problem in a lot of organizations, isn't it? It's you know, getting the balance for some of those loud voices. Any tips on that from the panel?
I mean, I can jump
Go
in
for
on
it.
a couple of notes. One of the things I did for kids and museums last year was create an inclusive chairing handbook. So trying to give chairs who might have been around for a while more ideas, more experience on actually bringing those different voices in. And I think, you know, certainly the loud voices is great and often can be useful, and they're passionate about things. So the first thing I would say in sort of answering the question is not to try and shut down those loud voices. What we want to be able to do is encourage that and bring that out, but at the same time sort of be able to divert the questions or conversation for those who might not have been quite so loud at this point yet in a meeting. I would say it's generally easier in person, going back to that conversation, but it is doable online as well. And I think there's sort of two key things I will sort of leave it with. One is creating that sort of team culture and an understanding. Often, you know, if you are one of 6, say, on the board, then the aim is to try and speak 1/6 of the meeting and have that sort of general mantra to try and sort of go, look, you know, just be conscious of how much you're talking or how much you're throwing in or not, perhaps. But the second thing is that actually everyone will want to contribute in slightly different ways. I think I've seen a bit of a conversation on the chat actually already about, you know, speaking to trustees outside of the meeting. Is in that board meeting the only time that they can have their view? Are the ways of doing it sort of in writing or, you know, with post-its and all that, again, going to that sort of conversation earlier, or is it actually there's good times in other meetings or in other catch-ups as well? There's other ways to bring those voices in, and it might be that in a board meeting not everybody is right there, and that could be for a whole variety of reasons. Even your usually quite passionate trustees might just have something else going on for them that day or that week or something as well. So just actually bearing those things in mind and doing your best to create that culture where you bring them in, and yeah, so not shutting down voices, but trying to encourage it and trying to find the routes that work for people in how you might bring that out, using not just a big group conversation. What are the other tools that are out there?
Absolutely. It is interesting when, you know, when I think about boards with dominating voices, sometimes those dominating voices can be very toxic. And other times, as you say, they come from passion, and often like longer serving people who are committee chairs, you know, and if it's the latter, it's almost easier to deal with simply by naming it, isn't it? Kind of saying maybe people could speak later, you know, let other people speak first. You know, I certainly think chairs should always wait until people have expressed their opinion. When you've got the toxic situation, it can be a lot more challenging to deal with. So I hope that, so is it Sharon? I hope that you're dealing with a positive one. And that does wind us up. I was just coming to you, Penny. She's just popped up, but I was looking at the time. I'm going to hand back over to Penny. Thank you very much to all the panelists and for everyone for all the questions and comments. That was amazing. So yeah, back to Penny.
Thank you so much, Felicia, Steph, Janine, Emrys, Sunny, and everybody who's put so many really amazing tips in the chat. I feel like that's been such a rich hour of top tips and cunning plans. So thank you so much. I picked out a few sessions from the rest of the week that you might be interested in that really speak to some of the things that have come out of this panel. So on Wednesday at 12:30, we've got a session called Challenge Accepted, How to Disagree Well, which definitely came up today. We've got a session on young trustees on Wednesday at 6 p.m, which is Young Trustees Wanted, Unlocking the Next Generation. And on Thursday at 12:30, we've got Who's Missing from Your Board, Inclusive Approaches to Finding Trustees. So very much about how to recruit new trustees. And then our final session on Friday is How Not to Be a Prat on a Board. I expect we're going to see a lot of, we've all got an inner prat, so we're going to see a lot of people for that. When you log off this session, if your Zoom is up to date, you'll get a quick fire question about how you found this session. Please do let us know. You'll also get a more detailed evaluation form afterwards if you want to give us more detail. A huge thank you to Stone King, who sponsored this session as part of the Good Governance strand. And I just want to say a little bit about Eastside People, who are the hosts of the festival, just to say that they do a lot of support to board. They give a lot of support to boards around good governance and around recruiting trustees. So do please check out their website, which is eastsidepeople.org. And thank you all very much for coming. I hope you have a nice evening. We may be seeing some of you at 6 p.m. for What is a Trustee and How do I Become One? Otherwise, hopefully see you tomorrow. So thank you all very much. Goodbye.